there's loads of different stuff that's going on in your brain when you're sleeping. I think one thing you say what isn't happening is not shutting down. It's as active, or maybe just slightly less, when you're asleep as when you're awake. When you don't sleep, that stuff does not get removed. Like imagine sanitation drivers, sanitation workers went on strike for like a month, and you've got bin bags on the street. We had in the UK in the 70s when that happened. Everything built up. It is fatal to not be able to sleep because your brain loses the ability to function completely. Without that, you can't survive. If you go too long to sleep, you get something called micro sleeps. It's like when your brain has 10 to 20, 30 seconds sleep, like because it has to do it. It's like someone drowning, come up for air for a second, like just one quick gasp and then back down again. The brain doesn't have like a mechanism for dealing with constant, low-grade, never-ending stress. We have the same stress response as our ancestors would facing a tiger. Like everyone has a suitcase which can hold a certain amount of stress, and if your suitcase gets too full, then you can't work anymore, or you can't move anymore because your suitcase is burst. So that would be like that's when a nervous breakdown happens. So you have experienced the full burnout.
Does stress really accelerate aging, or does taking away stress kind of remove some of that? Hello, I'm Avnish, and this is The Early Perspective. Each episode, we explore how the brain works and what that means for how we learn, think, and live. Today, we're kicking off a 3-part series on the fundamentals of the brain and how it works. In this episode, we're going to explore the science of sleep, why it matters, what it does for the brain, and how stress and burnout physically affect the body. Throughout this journey, we have Dr. Dean Burnett, who's going to help us break down all of this. He is a neuroscientist and author, as well as an in-demand science writer and communicator. His career spanned many roles, including psychiatry lecturer, research fellow, blogger, comedian, and comedy writer, and even a cadaver embalmer. Known for his sharp humor and highly accessible style, Dr. Burnett is the author of international bestsellers like The Idiot Brain and The Happy Brain, which explore how the brain really works and why it so often doesn't, through a blend of neuroscience, psychology, and wit. His books have been translated worldwide and are frequently recommended in schools, universities, mental health charities, and therapeutic settings. Dr. Burnett, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for that very nice introduction. Much appreciated.
Of course. Okay, so let's just start at the beginning. Could you tell me about your journey, how you got into this field, and what really sparked your curiosity?
Yeah, it's a very atypical journey. Like it's not one that most my scientist friends can share. I grew up in the South Wales valleys. So if you don't know, it's like former coal mining areas. And I was like 4 years old when they shut the mines down, and it's been, very small, isolated, remote communities experiencing economic depression ever since. And that gives you a lot of grounding in experiencing mental health issues and relating to people with that sort of thing going on. So people have said I've become quite empathetic towards people who have mental issues. I thought, well, yeah, I grew up with everyone experiencing such a thing. Only realized in hindsight, it's never occurred to me to think otherwise. But I was always a bit different. It's a small remote community. People like singing and sport essentially, and I always like reading and geeky things. And I kept wondering, like, why am I so different compared to the rest of my peers? My family are all very outgoing, bombastic types, and I was the shy, quiet kid. And at some point, I just was thinking there must be something wrong with my brain. Maybe these days I would be assessed for neurodivergence or something, but such a thing was not even contemplated then. And there was no such thing, it wasn't a notion we were aware of. So I just ended up finding some basic brain books, reading about that, and thinking, oh, this is interesting stuff. I never found an answer for why I was a bit weird, but I did get a sort of enthusiasm for it. And that sort of pushed me towards doing science. I've been interested in science fiction things. And in my school, it's a classic story I tell all the time, but not the most academically prosperous school I went to. It was a rough school, as we say. But you had like over 1,000 students. And the year I did my A-levels, if you added up the physics, chemistry, and biology A-level classes, you only got 7 students out of 1,000. And of those 7 students, 3 of them were me, because I was the one doing all the sciences. So I was like half my school's science output. So there's a lot of pressure on me to, like, if I got a bad mark on an exam, the entire school would like drop down the league tables. So that was a lot of pressure. You have to learn to think fast then. So, but yeah, like I went to university, Cardiff University, which is not far from the where I grew up physically, but mentally, it's like like go to the dark side of the moon. It's a small community. You don't go to the city, but I did, and I did neuroscience there, and then did a PhD here as well. Just got really into it. Plus, it's not my background. I was like totally uncharted waters. I sort of had a thing of how far can I go with this. Also, there's no one like me here, so I feel like I'm representing my community and my people, even though no one asked me to. Most people weren't aware I was there. But it's that sort of weird, you find a weird thing to hang your motivational hat on. Yeah, but I think because of my atypical background, I was never a great neuroscientist. I was okay. I could get by with it, but I was never a hotshot or a particularly dedicated or diligent or impressive researcher. So my career prospects in the straight sciences were limited. But because of my strange, quirky background and interests, I ended up being able to talk about it in ways people liked. And it turns out that people wanted to hear about the brain when you can tell people about it in interesting, funny ways. That's been my career ever since, really. So yeah, I'm the go-to brain guy for a lot of people now because I speak it in ways which people seem to understand at least, or don't resent hearing, or aren't immediately put off by, which is it's a useful thing to have. So I'm going to keep going at it as long as I can.
Is there anything specific that made you really passionate about comedy writing?
Yeah, it's like my father. Like I grew up in a pub, a bar.
Mm-hmm.
Like my father was like the MC, like the guy who hosted the nights. He was the landlord, so he was he was like the big man who sort of everyone, like he was the wit and the raconteur. And I don't know, I think it's some sort of weird male competition thing in that I was never going to be, he was a hard fighting, hard drinking ladies man, whereas I had no chance of ever being such a thing. But I thought, like, I'm going to see if I can outmatch him, just trying to be funny. I had like a solid friend group, and I was the serious one, the unfunny one. It's always like a little bit of a, like they made people laugh. Like, I did the homework quiet in the background, everyone copied, that sort of thing, which is not, in hindsight, not the best relationship. But I was just happy to have someone. But I went to university. Then I sort of, when you sort of come out of your shell, and then start doing things you're always meant to do, but no one knows you now. So got me into that. But I always wanted to do stand up, but I was always too scared because it's just like too. I did comedy improv plays and pantomimes, but I never took the plunge of doing that. But then I said, like you mentioned earlier, I spent 2 years between my undergraduate and postgraduate degrees farming the cadavers for the medical school, sort of like the human remains. I say, when you handle like a dozen dead bodies every day, your perspective on what bothers you tends to shift a bit. So I just ended up doing it. I'm going to try some comedy. What's the worst case scenario? No one laughs. They're still breathing. It's better than what I do for a day job. And so I tried it and sort of got into it. And yeah, always been something I've always like had a sort of enthusiasm for it. But yeah, never took the plunge to actually doing it until my day job was quintessentially worse than what the worst possible outcome. So yeah, it's another little weird string to my bow, as they say. So yeah, not the most typical way of getting into it, but it happened. So here we are.
Yeah, I think that's a really fascinating journey. Thanks for sharing that. Okay,
Anytime.
so with that, let's just dive straight into our discussion. So let's start with sleep, because it's something everybody sacrifices, obviously, but really a few people understand that truly. So from a neuroscience perspective, what's sleep actually doing for the brain? We often hear that pulling in all-nighters like being drunk. So what's actually happening when you don't sleep for 24 hours?
Well, there's loads of different stuff that's going on in your brain when you're sleeping. I think one thing you say what isn't happening is not shutting down. Like, I think people have this idea that it's like an off switch, or you put your brain on standby. It's as active, or maybe just slightly less, when you're asleep as when you're awake. The difference is like going from 80 miles an hour to 75 miles an hour in a car. Like, all right, it's slower, but it's not really. It doesn't make any tangible difference, is it? You're not going to say look at that slow car when it's going 75 miles an hour. That's not a thing. It's a lot of stuff. Like, we know it's vitally important. One of the more intriguing things about all higher life forms have evolved sleep, and they even start doing it when it's a survival issue. Like, dolphins sleep with half the brain at a time because they need to keep coming up for air, so they can't afford to have totally unconscious because they'll sink and drown. So like sleep is more important than drowning in the species, or like bears who hibernate. When they hibernate, that's like a comatose state. That is like your brain deactivating, but they still need a sleep cycle. So technically, when your animals hibernate, they wake up a bit in order to sleep, in terms of like the energy output of the brain. That's like really hard to get your head around. Like, so like they've woken up to sleep. Yes, they have technically, but it's so we know it's really important. The full gamut of what it's for is still being unpicked, but two particularly important processes happening in sleep is that, at the most fundamental level, it's clearing away all the cellular debris. So when your brain is active, you've got all your neurons, billions upon billions of neurons, producing trillions of chemical reactions to keep your brain active, in a sort of just keep it conscious, alive. But in the body, the reactions that go on in nerve cells, brain cells, are like the most chemically complex and elaborate. But this means they have a lot of byproducts. Like you burn wood to fuel a fire, you end up with ash and smoke. And it's like that sort of thing, and that builds up like waste debris tends to do. And the brain has a sort of a quite intricate and involved, complex cleaning system, sort of to filter all that away. But also, when you're awake, it's still coming, it's still going, it's still happening, and it builds up. So when you sleep, I know I said the brain's still active, but not all parts are active. It's all like the energy balance is different. When you sleep is when most of that debris is cleared away. So when it's got rid of, it leaves like a nice pristine cell environment behind, which means your brain functions can happen without all this stuff clogging up the works. So when you don't sleep, that stuff does not get removed. Like imagine like sanitation drivers, sanitation workers went on strike for like a month, and you've got bin bags in the street that we had in the UK in the 70s when that happened. It just, everything built up, you couldn't get through roads and stuff, so it was really quite unpleasant. And that's sort of what happens in your brain if you don't get enough sleep. All this cellular junk just accumulates, and it hampers your functioning. But what also happens when you sleep is sort of like the new connections, which are what your new learnings, new experiences are, which have been committed to memory. They've been laid down in the brain, but they're sort of not free floating, but they're not in the right place. So when you're asleep, your brain, your internal mechanisms of your brain are putting them where they're meant to be. The analogy I have is like it's like a library getting a big delivery of books just being like dumped in front of the building. And you've got those books, but when the library is closed, everyone was right, take these in, put them on the right shelf. This is a reference book. This is a popular science book. This is a textbook. This is about maths. This is about history. And put them all on the right shelves. And therefore, your brain is sort of sorting out the new information, linking it where it's meant to be. So you get old things connected to new things, and like this one belongs to this collection of memory units. And I believe the main theory is that's what dreaming is. When that's happening, like you're unconscious, but your brain is doing all this stuff. So it's linking old and new memories together in no particular order, no logical order. So then to do that, they have to be activated. So you're experiencing these memories being put, in with other things, and therefore you have a dream. So like that's why dreams are so weird, because it's a complete mishmash of memory units and individual sections. But it always feels so familiar because it is all memory. It's all stuff you've done before. Your brain has done this, just not in this particular order. So you have really strange experiences. Like, I was upside down in a boat made of teeth. My mother was there, but it wasn't my mother. It was the Prime Minister, and she was on fire. And then you're like, oh yeah, totally normal. And at the time, you just don't, when you're dreaming, you don't think about it. You say, yep, this is how things are. But when you wake up and go, what the hell was that? And then, yeah, so that's what it's like. It's always, and also kind of why dreams are hard to remember, because they're already memories. They're not like a unique experience. They are different assortments of memories being activated in weird ways. So they've already been laid down in the brain, and therefore they're not, this new configuration isn't sustained or isn't kept. Some people can remember their brains. It can be so vivid, your brain creates a new representation. But so like if you don't do that, don't sleep enough, then your memories, your new information doesn't get sorted, and you lose things, you forget things, you can't think straight. So those are just two of the more important processes that happen when we sleep, and why it's so fundamental to actually do it.
So, really fascinating point that you brought up was how dreams are really just like a collation of different memories and like different processes being linked. So, what about lucid dreams, like ones that you can control that you're aware of being in? What's happening there?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because it's hard to measure that, because obviously you can't be inside someone's dream and sort of take notes. Also, I think even if you are a lucid dreamer, it's kind of hard to do it on command. So how do you measure someone's brain when they're asleep? When they're having a lucid dream, how do you make sure that's happening? I don't know. Have you ever had an MRI scan?
No.
I've volunteered several. Like, there are many things. They're not quiet. It's like being strapped inside a screaming metal dolphin. It's like, it's hard to sleep during that, but some people can. Don't get me wrong. It's anything. The human brain gets used to anything. So first off, it's really hard to study such things. That's why dreams are hard to study anyway, because you can't, go in there and look at it. It could be like when we sleep, some people have, some parts of the brain are stimulated more than they should be. So you get different overactive parts because just the internal mechanisms we have. Some are just set too high, too low. Like sleep paralysis is one of those. That horrible thing when you wake up and you can't move and can't breathe. We believe what's happening there is when you're asleep. I say your brain's sort of active, but one part that's shut down is the motor cortex, because when you're dreaming, you don't want to be unconscious but acting out your dream. If you think you're running from some sort of giant clown monster and you're flashing like this, so you're in a bed, just like imagine that in the wild, just a big thing. You're a big human just lying there unconscious, making loads of noise. That's a bad survival strategy. So the motor cortex, which connects the brain to the muscles in your body, is shut down, like suppressed, like turned way down, like a volume knob. And we think what happens is sometimes you can wake up and that doesn't turn on straight away. So you've got, you're awake, you're conscious, but your body's still in sleep mode. And so therefore you feel like even the muscles in your diaphragm aren't switched on. So it feels like something on your chest and you feel afraid because of course you can't move. So you can see sleep isn't a perfect process. So some people might have a more active prefrontal cortex where the consciousness comes in. And so you get a more profound sense of self, more self-control. But there's also a possibility that lucid dreaming isn't a thing. It's just the thought I am dreaming is part of the dream. It seems like less likely because it happens to some people so often. When you think about it enough, if you've thought about it, it can happen in a dream. So it could be just that you weren't lucid dreaming. You were that was your dream. That just happened to involve an element of I am dreaming. It's one of those you can't really unpick this. You can't really get. Well, yeah, both could be easily. Both would feel the same. So, yeah, it's hard to really narrow that one down.
Yeah, I think it's honestly kind of similar to if you're dreaming and then you think you woke up, but then you woke up in your dream and you just
exactly, yeah. It's like I think people say if you die in your dream, you die in reality. But how do you know that? Who has said that? Oh, I just died. Did you? There's no way to know.
If sleep's doing so many important things, what's going to happen if you don't sleep? Like, for example, I was reading about, I think, the world record for longest without sleep, and that's 11 days. And with that, after a couple of days, there's severe hallucinations, psychosis, and all of these things setting in. So why is this happening? Is it just because this, debris, as you put it, is not being cleared out by sleep?
That's a big part of it, yeah. And also, the new information your brain has isn't being, your brain's not being organized. It's basically the brain's not doing any housekeeping, organization, being in, processing, filing things away. It's not doing any of that. And that has an impact. The structure of the brain, the intricate networks between different brain cells is how the brain functions. And a lack of sleep causes disruption to the very, very fibers in our brain, the very connections, very networks that sustain us. I say 11 days, I think, is the record. And that is actually quite dangerous. I mean, there was a documentary in the UK not too long ago about a condition where someone couldn't sleep. And after, it wasn't that long, they literally died. It is fatal to not be able to sleep because your brain loses the ability to function completely. Without that, you can't survive. There's been lots of reports in history of things which were exacerbated by lack of sleep, and a lot of bad medical accidents or incidents because doctors pull in 3 12-hour shifts in a row and it's not been able to sleep and function. And I've heard some people link the Challenger shuttle explosion to engineers being overworked, not sleeping, because you can't focus then. And I think what the important thing to remember is, although all the brain is affected eventually, and something called if you go too long asleep, you get something called micro sleeps. It's like when your brain has 10 to 20, 30 seconds sleep, because it has to do it. It's like someone drowning, come up for air for a second, just one quick gasp and then back down again. It's like trying to do anything they can to to keep going in the face of this onslaught of sleep damage or awake damage, I suppose. It's not actually the lack of sleep is the problem. But the parts of the brain which involve thinking, consciousness, focusing, analysis, those are the most intricate, most recently evolved parts of the human brain. But because they're the most complex, most sophisticated, that means like they're the most easy to disrupt. So they're like the first things to go. Like you get fuzzy, you can't sort of think straight because that's the part of your brain which is already suffering from the sleep debris buildup. And it's only when you get further and further along that the other parts of the brain, more fundamental, more sturdy ones, like physical controls and stuff, that's when they start getting disrupted. So yeah, there's a lot of negative knock-on effects from lack of sleep because the brain's just not getting any maintenance. Much like you run a car for 11 days straight, stopping it, it's going to break down, it's going to burn out, and the brain's far more likely to do that than anything else.
Mm-hmm. So another thing is what's causing variability in sleep. For example, even if two people are sleeping 10 hours of sleep, somebody could be completely well rested versus another person could be incredibly tired. Or, for example, when I sleep like 4 hours in a night, I feel more well rested than when I sleep 10 hours. So why is all that variability happening in just the same action of sleeping?
Yeah, I mean, some people just differ a lot. It'll be a physiological, biological thing. Some people have brains which are just by sheer by nature and nurture so wired in a way which can get by with less sleep. Like they might have a slightly more efficient clearing mechanism. They might have, less complex tangles. Might have a more efficient just network in general, so they can get by or feel fine after less sleep than a typical person would. Other people like to have, again, it's not a negative thing. Just you might have a brain which is so tangled, so full of stuff that you need more sleep. So individual variation will happen. And again, bear in mind, it's not just the brain. A lot of it's the body as well. So if you have a bodily system, like you're physiologically more efficient or just more healthy in some way or other, or just have better plumbing, then you might your body will go, oh, I'm fine. I can get going again, because sleep is also restful for the rest of your body, not just the brain. But we're focusing on the brain here. But I think in terms of the sleep for 4 hours, you feel fine. Sleep for 10, you feel rotten. That I think is to do with the sleep cycle, because people sleep in a certain specific cycle. So you have the sort of the drowsy stage where you're still awake but falling asleep. Then you've got non-REM sleep level 1, 2, and 3. That's deeper and deeper into sleep. And then REM sleep, which is when dreaming happens. That's when like the brain's full on. Let's do the hardcore part of the sleep thing. It's like that's when they activate the power drills, or then nothing else can go on around it. And then you come out to that, and then you sort of wake up, then go back into it. Now, typical like 8 hours sleep, that can happen like 4 times, maybe 5, maybe slightly less. So that's usually why we say 8 hours is the norm. But like after 4, you may have gone through 2 full cycles, which you can get by on that. That's fine. But if you're on 10, then you're probably waking up halfway through an extra cycle. That's when you wake up like halfway through a cycle. That's when you feel like, oh, what? That's when you've totally discombobulated, because your brain was interrupted rather than it's not it's not an organic wake up. It's like an enforced wake up. So like someone like if your alarm goes off and you get up and you get ready and you sort of but you get dressed, have a shower, eat your toast, and then go out the door. That you're ready for the day. Then if your alarm doesn't go off, someone shakes you awake. You've got 10 minutes to get to work. You're like, you're just like throwing things on, like brushing your teeth while shaving, and then it sets you up badly the rest of the day. Then it's sort of similar thing happens on the neurological level if the sleep cycle is interrupted rather than it comes to its natural conclusion. So that'll probably be a big part of why more sleep can sometimes feel like less sleep, because you got all these loose ends. Your brain just woke up with what's going on. So it can be oddly less helpful.
Yeah. So just to reiterate, you're just saying if you wake up mid-sleep cycle, it'll make you feel more groggy and irritable, right?
Quite probably, yeah. I mean, because your brain's like I wasn't ready. What's going on? And so, then that'll sort of have a knock-on effect the rest of the day. Then, because I think it's almost like when you walk up the stairs and you try to step on a step that isn't there. You're like, that obviously doesn't last the whole day, but it is sort of really unsettling, isn't it? So,
So There's also a very popular idea of sleep debt and clearing that by getting a really good night of sleep, like not sleeping for days and then getting like 20 hours of sleep in one day. How true is that, or is that completely false?
It's true to an extent, in that, if you've built up all this, you know, sleep lag and all stuff that's gone on in your brain which needs to be done, which hasn't been done because you haven't been asleep, then a big sleep will sort of, address that. It will sort of clear out a lot of the debris and do a lot of the filing that needs to be done. So yeah, but I think sleep debt is probably the right word for it, in that, you can't put this off forever. This has to be done because it's your brain. It needs it to function. It needs to happen, at some point. Again, I think putting it off is the right phrase. Like, yeah, this is going to happen eventually. You're just not doing it now, and it's got short term gain. Obviously, people can overrule sleep all the time. If you are working or you've got a test, like I've done a few times. When I was in university, I did exams. I pulled an all nighter because I wasn't confident. Actually, one time I did an all nighter. I was drinking like 6 cups of really strong coffee, huge mugs. I just went in the next morning. I actually was so out of it. I was all the information in my head, but as a person, I was just not functioning. I think I called the examiner Dad at some point. Thanks, Dad. What? And, on the way home, I tried to pick a fight with a pigeon. I thought it was looking at me weird. So that I was this caffeine and fatigue was not a good combo. So yeah, it's I got a good mark on the test because that was all I could have in my brain at that time. But I wouldn't advise it as a method. Um, so yeah, it can impact you in that respect. But yeah, so I think sleep debt is the correct term, but the idea that you can sort of just put off sleep for several days and then just have one big sleep and you're back to normal, that isn't true either. That's wrong, because you're almost like you're just resetting to the point where you also, like, say like you don't go to sleep for 3 days, you have one big sleep, and your brain's like, oh cool, now it feels more like I haven't had a sleep for a day and a half, and that you still have to have the sleep you've missed, but people just put it off constantly. So it's basically constantly kicking the can down the hill.
Yeah.
You're always going to be running at a deficit. So you need like 2 or 3 days to catch up on the sleep you didn't have, because it's a debt. It doesn't go away. So you can't just like you think, oh, one day is fine. No, it's all still there. So yeah, it's a real thing in that sleep debt is a thing, but it's not a real thing that you can't just clear it with one good sleep. You're going to be, that stuff sticks around. You've got to do it properly at some point, rather than just to fob it off forever.
hmm And then you also mentioned that your fatigue also kind of made you delirious. So, is mental fatigue really similar to physical exhaustion, or are they just neurologically different?
I mean, there's obviously they're going to be overlapping, because when you're physically fatigued, you've done something, and when your brain's been involved in that too. Like, so it's very hard to achieve complete mental relaxation whilst being physically. But it can happen. Like people say, when you go for a run, they just like switch off and zen out. Or people link exercise to being calming and peaceful because you're doing something mundane and repetitive, or like just purely physical. So yeah, you can have physical tiredness without mental tiredness. So they are different. Obviously, when you're physically tired, it's your muscles, your organs, your bones which have taken the brunt, and your brain is something else. And similarly, you can like when I write books, like if I have a good spell of like 6 hours straight writing, I'm like, oh, I'm just feeling all mentally drained, whereas physically haven't really moved at all, apart from just typing, which isn't really that, not a lot of exertion required there. So when you sleep, though, like I said, you have all this chemical debris building up, and the parts of your brain which process thinking and perception, and telling the difference between this is something I'm thinking seriously, this is something I'm experiencing, this is a random thought which bubbled up from over there, ignore that. You find that harder to do because your brain's already overwhelmed. Like, it's been overly taxed, so it's running on hot, and it can't do all the things it normally does, like just filter out nonsense. Like, it's okay, I had this thought of, hey, what if that guy was on fire? Okay, smart part of your brain's going, shut up, mate. Go play in the corner, be quiet, you. And like then when you're going to sleep, they're too busy, they can't do it. So the guy's saying, what if that guy was on fire? Maybe he is on fire, I don't know. So he's got more of a say because the rest of your brain is overwhelmed. So yeah, you get delirious, you get fuzzy, you get hard to focus because the parts of your brain which stop that happening are very tired. And yeah, so you don't get that with physical fatigue so much because it's bodily, but obviously there's a lot of things which involve brain and body working together and both becoming equally tired. So yeah, they tend to go hand in hand a lot of the time.
So, you're saying that getting your brain so overwhelmed that it's leading to all these kind of symptoms, right? So, how different is being incredibly fatigued and being drunk, especially in terms of attention or judgment and self control?
There is overlap, yeah, because it's the alcohol which suppresses parts of the brain via. I think what happens is alcohol stimulates GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid neurons, which are the ones they're basically like the if you think of the brain as a road network. GABA neurons are the red traffic lights, so they stop things happening, and that sounds like they suppress things on the brain, and which is really important because obviously a road network without red traffic lights is going to be chaotic pretty quickly. So alcohol seems to interact with them and heighten and enhance their potency, so things get shut down, like the ability to feel inhibitions and stuff like that, or the ability to walk eventually or speak properly and so on. So yeah, there is overlap between the actions of alcohol and the actions of fatigue, but it's also qualitatively different because alcohol is a global thing. It affects every part of the brain. The molecules are so small, they get into everywhere. Whereas sleep or fatigue is affecting each part of the brain like subtly differently because it's its own mechanisms for causing the problem and it's its own output. So this part of the brain will be affected in this way and this part will be affected in a different way, and so you won't have the same outcome. But also, like, alcohol does disrupt sleep, so there's going to be a lot of that'll muddy the waters a bit because the sleep is a very well regulated neurological process in your brain. You've got the circadian rhythms and all the different hormones and stuff, and those are also thrown out of whack by alcohol. So your brain's also processing weirdly, and it's like all the the chemical processes which clear the brain's debris away. Those are affected by alcohol too. So alcohol and sleep issues do tend to overlap a lot. So yeah, it's a chemical difference, but there is a lot in common there. But I think if you've been both, you can sort of when you're tired, you're still compos mentis in a sense of I'm not drunk, but either way, you shouldn't be operating heavy machinery because your brain isn't up to it for different chemical reasons. But either way, the end result is the same. Stop doing that. Go lie down.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting that they have so many similarities despite them being so different chemically, especially.
Mm.
So, another thing that really goes hand in hand with fatigue and overworking is burnout. Especially now, it's become really relevant among students, especially because
Yeah,
of
totally.
the high stress environments and the pressure that they feel to do good, and all of this is leading to burnout. So, first off, what even is burnout? Is it just something which is psychological, or is it something real in the brain that can be observed?
Yeah, it's a real thing in that it's got a sort of neurobiological aspect to it. It's got a tangible part. A lot of it will be psychological, but that I sort of sometimes worry about saying that because people think when I'm saying or when anyone says it's just psychological, it's like again just psychological. It's all in your head. Well, yeah, but that doesn't mean it's not a thing. It's the brain. Yes, it's all in your head. Everything's in your head. If you want to argue that, that doesn't mean it's not real. It's like saying yeah, like my leg's broken. It's all in your body. Yeah, that's not really that's not really addressing the problem. But so it's a strange way to put it like that. So I try to make sure it's not. I don't mean that. I don't mean psychological as in not an issue. But yeah, so like burnout is becoming more and more of a thing because jobs are becoming more demanding in a complex ways. Some older folks might say, "Oh, we used to go down the mines." I know my grandfather would say it, but yeah, I'm not saying that wasn't a very important and dangerous job, but I could also argue it's a fairly straightforward one. You go down, you take hack mine out of rock, and you come bring it back up. It's straight. It's easy to grasp, whereas now you have like multiple different duties and complex ones, and technology has made it also much more demanding too. Or like you say, students you've got so much expectation now, like this. The era of walking into a job after school is just not a thing anymore. So you have to achieve as much as you can and get the best marks you can to give yourself a fighting chance in the wider world. So yeah, it's a lot of stress to be dealing with. But stress actually has it's its own chemical component. And when you feel stress, like it releases the stress hormones like cortisol, which have tangible physical effects on your body. Like it increases muscle tension, increases like heart rate, it suppresses your immune system, and so you do feel the physical effects of stress. And one thing the human brain is brilliant in so many ways, but one of its Achilles heels, one thing it hasn't evolved sort of a thing to deal with, is long-term chronic stress. Because obviously when we have a stressful response, it's the fight or flight mechanism, or fight, flight, freeze, flop, fall. There's lots of F's added to it since that was coming, but like I'll say fight or flight. You know what I mean? The whole the adrenaline response of like about to sort of like either run or launch myself at the thing. Stress is like the low key first stages of that. I always say like the full fight or flight response is like the final boss in a video game, and the stress response is like all the little minions which come at you on your way to the final boss. That sounds like I'm very old. Do video games even work like that anymore? Is that still a thing?
Yeah, it depends on the game, but yeah.
I don't know. But like, my son
still very relevant.
Yeah, my son watches all these YouTube games. Because I haven't got a clue what this is. Fortnite? What's that? Again, I'm old. Yeah, but that's the sort of thing which But you can think of it. If you ended up dealing with nothing but wave after wave after wave of minions or like level 1 type enemies, the ones who drop crap loot, that sort of thing. I picked up a few things, but like that would weigh you down eventually. You couldn't do that forever, and that's what stress does to your brain. Your brain doesn't have like a mechanism for dealing with constant low grade, never ending stress. Usually, it's like the big one, like fight or flight. No, if you fight or flighted, the stress is gone. The cause of the problem is gone. Either you've run away from it, you've killed it, or it's killed you. Either way, no more stress. But no, the low-key chronic stress isn't something we've evolved to really deal with. And part of that, it's almost like the brain's a victim of its own success, because now we can be stressed out by things we can think of. I think like the idea of, what if I don't get a good mark on this exam? That is a stressor. But you resolve that by getting a good mark on the exam, but the build-up, it'll be months of this. If I don't get a good mark on this exam, what if this question comes up? I'm not very good at that. What if this examiner, they don't like me very much? Or what if it's what if that stresses us out? But we have the same stress response as our ancestors would facing a tiger. Well, I mean, not full, but the same mechanisms are triggered. So we have this constant drip, drip, drip of stress, which affects our body and our brain, and basically, like the fatigue, it wears us down over time. So it's sort of like it's like water on a stone, but not doesn't make it shiny. It makes it more jagged. It makes it more harder to function. So you can keep going for a long time like that. And at a time when stress can be kind of a helpful thing, but those are quite specific scenarios. But over time, like the stress response will just weigh down your ability to cope with it. You don't have any more capacity. And some people have more capacity than others, especially if you have a more, challenging upbringing, like when you're developing, compared to the stress suitcase. Like everyone has a suitcase which can hold a certain amount of stress, and if your suitcase gets too full, then you can't work anymore, or you can't move anymore because your suitcase is burst. So that would be like that's when a nervous breakdown happens. So you have experienced the full burnout. Some people have more room in the case than others, because some people built up so much stress in their childhood. Like the suitcase is half full of rocks. It's like I've got this much space for more stress, and this space is already taken up by old stress. So I got less space to take on more stress, and therefore I am more prone to burnout, more prone to stress, more prone to anxiety, and so on, things like that. Yeah, stress has a very complex and multifaceted impact on our ability to function and work on the biological and psychological levels.
So if stress and burnout are so intertwined, why does burnout kind of feel different and more numbing than stress alone?
Well, I think it's because the stress response is like its own individual thing. So you're feeling stressed, your brain's going, oh, a stressful thing, I will react like this. Like I said, release the stress hormones, put more adrenaline into your system, focus on the negative stuff because you want to deal with that. So the stress response is like is the thing you're experiencing over time, constantly. And burnout is when you lose your ability to react to it, essentially. So like you're too much stress, almost like the suitcase. Like stress is like the objects being put in the suitcase. burnout is the suitcase bursting. So like it's a different, it's very intertwined, but it's a different process. It's not like I'm not putting more stuff in the suitcase is broke. Or
Hmm.
like pouring water into a water balloon. Like the stretching is the stress, the explosion is the burnout, because basically you can't react anymore because your brain's gone, I'm done. I literally have, or like all the glitches that accumulate in the computer, which is the stress, and then the blue screen, the shutdown, that's the burnout. Time out, I can't do this anymore, and they just sort of like, boom. So like burnout feels so numb, or like nothing, because your brain's ability to react has been spent by too much stress. So you've reacted so much to the stress, you've burnt out, which means you can't react anymore. So it's numb.
Hmm.
That is how I think how it works.
Okay. And then, so is the reason that people kind of respond to stress differently is mainly because of their suitcase being half filled with rocks, as you were saying before? Like, for example, I run incredibly well on stress. Like, I can only really start studying properly the day before a test because that's
Mm.
how my brain's kind of programmed. But then some people feel like studying the day before a test is completely useless. They can't remember anything. Is that just because their suitcases already filled with stress too much to add more?
That might be part of it, but see, everyone's brain is unique and different. So some people will be stressed out by different things. So like for you, I was like you as well. Like I always did my best revision the night before because up against the clock. I mean, there's something called the Yerkes-Dodson curve, which shows that with most people, if you increase stress, your performance at a task, your brain's ability to do stuff actually improves because of like all the adrenaline in your system, all the cortisol is making you focus. So your ability to do the task, which is stressing you out, actually increases up to a point. But you've got too much stress, and then your brain starts being affected negatively, so you can't do as much anymore. So your performance goes down. If the ideal workplace would have just a little bit of stress, keeps you at that nice sort of sweet spot of good performance, minus stress. So like a lot of managers and people try to maintain that. It's really hard to do with because like I say, everyone's different. Whereas I do my best revision uh, the night before. I'm sure you do as well. Some people find the idea of not revising more stressful than the act of not revising. So like they were like, well, if I don't revise now, I'm going to be strung out and stressed. So they revise like months ahead, weeks ahead, which is probably the better approach. But if it doesn't work for you, it
Yeah.
doesn't work for you. So yeah, like those people will have, okay, but that doesn't bother you, but it does bother me. Like everyone's individual. Like me and my sister grew up. My sister loved the smell of petrol, gasoline, whereas I found it horrible. And we got the same parents, we lived in the same place, grew up in the same way, but she just liked it and I didn't. And some people just vary like that sort of thing. So some people will find that the idea of not revising like before terrifying. So that'll stress them out. So they have to not do that. Whereas I'm like you. I knew if there's like 2 months to go, I think if I like revise this now, I won't remember it later. I'll have to do it again. So I'm going to waste my time when I could be doing something more productive, like doing my coursework or whatever. So no, that's less stressful for me this way around. So yeah, each individual person has their own particular suite of stress responses, and no two people will be exactly alike. So yeah, people get burned up by different things that way.
So another thing is that people often associate stress with aging and even wrinkles, of course. People think that stress is related to all of that. So how true is that? Does stress really accelerate aging, or does taking away stress kind of remove some of that?
I mean, there's obviously going to be links there because when you're, as you get older, you just accumulate more responsibilities, like those things to be stressed about. When you have your own kids, they're your responsibility now. So it's not just you anymore or your partner. It's also two small, vulnerable people two or more, who are completely dependent on you mentally, psychologically, physically, financially. That just adds. You have a lot more options for stress as you age, but at the same time, your brain and body are getting older. Like you are wearing down a bit. You're not as efficient and robust as you once were. Like those classic cartoons of like a 40-year-old man just getting some of his mailbox. I think it's an extra fabulous comic. Like I picked my mail up with it, and now my neck is wrecked. And then his kid runs past him, and gets hit by a car, and just gets up and walks off. Like, yeah, that's the contrast between young and old is quite stark sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then lots of older people do sort of use this as a sort of way to dismiss the stresses the young people have. My grandparents were quite prone for this, like I mentioned before, but I was on a school bus once which caught fire because they were really old buses. Came back from school that day and like, yeah, the bus caught fire. Wasn't the greatest day in school. My grandparents were both like, oh, when we were in school, we didn't have a bus. We had to walk 10 miles every day. Just no, you didn't. Stop lying. Like I was like, oh, it was better than I did. It was you don't know you're born. Calm down. There's no need for that. Like, oh, what have you got to be stressed about? It doesn't work that way. Yeah. So as you get older, like I think the physical part of your face and your flesh will respond to what you make it do. So if you are someone who's like constantly scowling like all the time, it's tempted to think that's where those wrinkles come from. So I don't know how valid that is, because obviously it's a case of, well, we don't have the identical person who wasn't stressed the whole time. Let's see what they look like in comparison.
Yeah.
I don't really know how you would study that in terms of, it makes you look different. But it wouldn't surprise me. Like my father's always said, baldness, you get it from your kids. Like, oh God. Yeah, I've got it as well. Like this, rubbing your head in stress and then rubs it all away. I mean, that's not how it works, but it's a funny image. So yeah, it is a sort of, but then someone who's not stressed usually tends to have an easier life. If you don't have any stress, then that means things are taken care of for you. Like if you've got a very privileged background, or like just things can be, or just you've been really, really lucky, which is nothing wrong with that. But if you haven't had to deal with stress, it means you haven't had the physical response to stress so many times. So it will potentially aid you that way. But yeah, look, it's a big part of the whole tapestry of what causes us to look like we do as we get older or not. Yeah, probably can happen a bit, but I wouldn't say stress is the only thing making someone look different as they age, because there's so much going on in one typical life.
So what would you say is the best way to manage your stress?
I think it's one of those things where some people are so tempted to sort of say, well, no, stress is all in the mind, like I've said earlier on. And that's what a cop out as well. I mean, there's a lot of advice, saying like, well, no, you can just choose to be happy. Like a lot of people call it toxic positivity, because it does actually put the onus on the person being stressed. Like, you're stressed. Well, how about you don't be stressed? Well, oh, great, thanks for that. I would never have thought of that. But usually it's not you stressing you out. It's external factors, life, work, people, family, relationships, whatever. And like those, you only have a finite amount of control over those things.
Mm-hmm.
So if your ability to control them is less than your ability to do anything stress-wise, your options are limited. Or it's a lot of stress comes from environmental things, like if you grow up in a high crime area, you're constantly worried about crime because it could easily happen to you. That's going to be a regular source of stress. What are you meant to do about that? Well, move somewhere else. Well, yes, if I could do that, I would have done it ages ago. I live here because I can't do that. So there's lots of ways to sort of like try and say, yeah, well, it's actually your responsibility to deal with it, which I worry about being commonplace. It's a very common TikTok thing. Like, no, this is what you do to solve your stress. Like some random person. Who are you to tell me that? Who asked you? I didn't ask you anything. I don't go on TikTok very much for this exact reason. But it can really be helpful to figure out, what am I stressed about, and which of those things are within my control to do something about. And all those things, which are actually, take a step back and think, is it actually as important as I think it is? Because me and my wife discussed this, like she has to have like the dishes stacked in a certain way on the drying rack. And I'm like, well, okay, but if I do it my way, do they still get dry? Maybe half an hour later. So it really bothers you, but should it bother you? Like, are you letting it bother you to the extent that, and I'm the same. I get really bothered about things which she doesn't have any problem with. So, it's part of a relationship, but you can sort of look at the stresses and say, all right, that's bothering me. Should it be? Objectively speaking, if I step back, what's going to happen if I don't stress about this? Sometimes you can find, like, because we have so many different expectations and the sets of ideas that we want, how we want things to be, how things to look, we can stress ourselves out unnecessarily by saying, like, well, what's the worst that can happen if I don't do that? Obviously, younger people are going to be more prone to this because you're constantly being told you must do this, you must do this, you must do this thing. This is really important. This exam, this test, this school, this university, this will set the direction of your entire life. And like, all right, no pressure. That's it's really hard to get out from under that. But sometimes you think, well, they keep telling me that. Is it true? If I get a lesser good mark in this exam, what's going to happen to me really? Sometimes it is really worth being stressed about. But there's things like that, like if people liking you, people thinking certain things about you, sometimes you have to look at those and think, oh, can I let that go? It's harder to do, but it is sometimes worth doing because it does give you a bit more scope to do with other things.
Okay, so before we wrap up, I just had one last question. If students listening could change one thing about how they manage sleep or stress or burnout, what would make the biggest difference for them in the brain long term?
I think, specifically with students that they're doing in their teens, more sleep is needed when you're a teenager, and it's often like life keeps telling you can't have it. So your bodily clock shifts when you're a teenager. When you're younger, as a kid, like you go to bed by 8 or 9, you wake up at 7 for school. Nice rhythm. Your parents expect that too. But when all the really profound neurological changes happen during adolescence, during puberty, when you develop into adulthood, a lot that's happening within the brain, and therefore your brain has more to do, more maintenance to do. Therefore, you tend to need more sleep at different times too, because the part which sets your sleep is shifted around as well. But that's not how adults see it a lot of the time. They'll say like, "Oh, you're just being lazy. Like you're sleeping until 11. You're just late." No, that's how much sleep as you need. Like you didn't get to bed till 12. Not even if you go to bed and lie down at 10 o'clock, you probably won't fall asleep until like 12, 1 o'clock, because your brain's going, I'm not sleepy yet. I'm just going to do it at my new schedule. So they've done studies which show that when school students in certain parts of the US were given an extra hour in bed, like so, the teenage students, they start at 10 now, not at 9. They seem to make a really big difference to having test marks went up, academic performance, behavior, and like less reports to principals and stuff. So just because they have more sleep and they have therefore better functioning brains, they can now do stuff. They can actually be normal again. And that is something a lot more profound. A lot of people don't really appreciate that. Like they just call young people and students lazy, which is like compared to someone just run a marathon. Like like you're greedy. You are. Like, look at you taking all that air. I clearly need it. I have a dire need of this oxygen. Please stop judging me for my physical reaction to what's happening. So yeah, I think if you can get more sleep, you don't feel ashamed of that. That's really important. And I know it's obviously say like put your phone away before that those things, they can keep you awake just by the sheer novelty, the sheer never-ending feeds of new things to look at. So that can just keep you awake because your brain thinks, oh, I haven't finished yet, and therefore you never finish because obviously social media doesn't. It's not got a finite end point. I know some people in the pandemic and lockdown, they joked like, yeah, I completed YouTube because I just had nothing else to do. But that's still not a thing, is it? It's constantly being updated. So yeah, getting more sleep when you can and not feeling ashamed of it is probably step one in getting better sleep hygiene and healthy sleeping patterns.
Yeah, I think even like a study which focused on daylight saving and how it adds an extra hour or takes it away, found that people, especially when the extra hours added, suicide rates go down, performances go up, all sorts of things happen just from that extra hour.
Yeah,
The
won't surprise
exact
me at all.
opposite happens when you take away that hour.
Yep,
Okay,
totally.
great. Dr. Burnett, thank you so much for helping us understand why exhaustion isn't just a failure of effort, it's just really just a biological signal. So,
Totally.
stress, burnout, and a culture of people who lack sleep has been becoming incredibly commonplace. So, I think learning about this is incredibly important. Your brain isn't just lazy; it's really limited, and respecting those limits is part of learning how to function well. And for listeners, if this episode gave you a new perspective on how sleep is important and how stress can physically affect your body, share it with somebody you think would learn something from it too. If you guys enjoyed this episode and learned something new, make sure to follow on your favorite podcasting platform or on YouTube. I'm Avnish, this is The Early Perspective, and I'll see you next time.